There's a specific kind of pain that nobody warns you about. It's not the loud kind, not the kind that hits you all at once and leaves you gasping. It's the quiet kind, the kind that only shows up after the fact, when you're sitting somewhere ordinary, a stairwell, a kitchen, a parking lot, and you suddenly realize that the moment you thought was nothing was actually everything, and you were just too busy looking in the wrong direction to see it. That's the story I want to tell you today, and I'm going to need you to stay with me, because this one doesn't move fast. It moves the way real things move, slowly and then all at once. If you've ever confused comfort for love or mistaken consistency for friendship when it was quietly something more, this one is for you. Subscribe if you're new here, because I promise every story I tell is going to make you feel something real. I grew up in a house where love was demonstrated through achievement. My father, Dr. Harlan Hartwell, was one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons on the East Coast. He was brilliant, precise, and almost entirely unreachable. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I've done enough therapy to understand that he gave what he had. But what he had wasn't warmth, it was expectation, and I absorbed that like a language. By the time I was 22 and starting medical school, I genuinely believed that love was something you qualified for, something you had to earn through performance. So when I met Remy at 24, a jazz pianist with paint-stained fingers and a laugh that filled an entire room, I didn't just fall for him, I surrendered to him. He was everything my upbringing had kept behind glass, unpredictable, tender one moment, unreachable the next. He made me feel electric and invisible at the same time, and I confused that intensity for depth. We were together for 2.5 years, and then one morning he told me he'd been offered a touring opportunity in Europe. He said it the way you'd mention a change in the weather, casually, already decided. He never asked me to come. He just left. I spent 8 months afterward putting myself back together by working harder than any human being should reasonably work. I buried myself in surgical residency and told myself I was fine. I told everyone I was fine. I was absolutely not fine. I met Nolan Cassidy on a Thursday afternoon in November. I was sitting in a hospital grief support session, required observation hours for my residency. He was facilitating it. He was 31, former military, and he had this quality I couldn't immediately name. He listened to people the way most people only pretend to, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually listening, like what the other person was saying genuinely mattered to him. We became acquaintances first. Coffee machine small talk, elevator nods, the kind of low-pressure familiarity that builds naturally in a hospital, where everyone is perpetually exhausted. He learned my coffee order without making a thing of it. He remembered I didn't like the lights in the third-floor break room and would text me if the second-floor one was free. Small things. So small, I didn't catalog them at the time. The night I really understood what kind of person he was came after a shift that broke something in me. I lost a 26-year-old patient, a young woman who'd come in for what should have been a routine procedure. I won't go into the details. I just remember walking out of that OR and finding myself in the stairwell between the second and third floors, sitting on a cold concrete step, completely empty. Not crying, just hollow. Nolan found me. I still don't know if he was looking or if it was chance. He sat down on the step beside me, without saying anything. No, are you okay? No, you did everything you could. Nothing. Just the weight of another human being choosing to sit in the hard place with me instead of trying to pull me out of it. Eventually, I said I didn't even know why I was sitting there, and he said, "You don't have to know why. You just have to sit." That was it. That was the whole conversation, and it was the first time in years I'd felt genuinely less alone. Over the next few months, Nolan became my closest friend. And I want to be honest with you, it genuinely felt like friendship to me. Completely. We shared playlists, we had inside jokes about the hospital's worst coffee. He knew the anniversary of the first patient I ever lost, and he never made it weird. He'd just check in that day, casually, the way a good person does. He remembered the name of my childhood dog when I mentioned it once, briefly, in passing. He was consistent in a way I had no framework for, because nothing in my life had ever been that steady. My friend Liesel told me once, half joking, half serious, "You know he looks at you differently, right?" I laughed. I told her she was projecting. I genuinely believed that. I wasn't being naive on purpose. I think I had just learned, somewhere along the way, to distrust anything that felt easy. If it didn't hurt, it didn't count. And being around Nolan didn't hurt. So I filed it under friendship and kept moving. There was one thing, though, that I didn't think about until much later. Nolan was offered a position, a prestigious trauma counseling role in Portland, a serious step up. He turned it down. When I asked him why, he just said it wasn't the right time. I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't think about it again for months. Then, Remy came back.
He was standing outside my apartment building on a Tuesday evening, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like he hadn't fully thought through what he was going to say. He told me he'd made a mistake, that he'd chosen wrong. He looked softer than I remembered, or maybe I just wanted him to. I won't pretend I felt nothing. I did. Old feelings don't evaporate, they just go quiet, and seeing him woke some of them back up. I told Nolan about it the next day, and that was the first time I noticed something shift in his face. Just briefly, just a flicker, before he smoothed it over. He asked me quietly, "What do you want, Sophia?" I didn't have an answer. He didn't push. I started seeing Remy again, casual at first, coffee, long walks, conversations that felt familiar. But something was different, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't. Remy talked about himself the way he always had, like his life was the main event and mine was the backdrop. He performed emotion beautifully, but he didn't ask me things, not real things, not the way Nolan asked me things. It was like trying to reread a book that once meant everything to you and realizing the magic lived in the first reading. You can't go back there. You can only pretend. There was a hospital fundraiser gala about 3 weeks into me seeing Remy again. One of those old money evenings where everyone wears something expensive and talks about things they don't actually care about. Remy was my date. Nolan was there with Dr. Priya Anand, my attending, and I saw him across the room, laughing quietly at something someone said, and I felt this tightening in my chest that I immediately told myself was nothing. My father pulled me aside near the end of the evening. He mentioned, almost as a footnote, the way he said everything important, that he'd heard good things about the trauma counselor I worked with. And then he said, "He asked about you, you know, more than professionally." Then he walked away to talk to someone else. My father delivering the most significant sentence of my year like it was a weather report. Later, Remy made a careless comment near a group of colleagues. Not cruel, but thoughtless. The kind of thing that reminded me with quiet finality that he had never quite learned how to hold me carefully. I excused myself and went to stand on the balcony, and Nolan came outside. Not dramatically, not like he'd been watching, just there, the way he always was. I told him I didn't know what okay felt like anymore. He said, "I know." 2 words, and they carried more than most people's paragraphs. I ended things with Remy 4 days later, not because of Nolan, because of me.
because I finally admitted that going back to something broken doesn't make it whole, it just makes you both more tired. Nolan called me the evening after. Not a text, a call. He asked if he could come by. I said yes. He sat across from me in my apartment, and there was something different in the way he held himself. Careful, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. He said, "I've been your friend, Sophia. I've wanted to be that, genuinely. But I'd be lying if I told you that was all it was. It's been more than that for a long time. I'm not saying this to pressure you. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to know that someone has been completely certain about you for longer than you probably realize." I remember the silence after, not uncomfortable, just enormous. And then I thought about Portland. "The posting," he said. "The one in Portland? Was that because of—" He didn't answer. He just looked at me, and I had my answer. 2 years of memories rearranged themselves in about 30 seconds. Every small thing, every choice, the way he'd always known when to show up and when to give me space. I told him I needed time to think. He nodded and said, "I know, I'm not going anywhere." He meant it both ways, and we both knew it. I thought about it for 4 days. And then Liesl told me something that cracked me open completely. She told me Nolan had confided in her 6 months earlier that he had feelings for me, but had made a decision that she had promised to keep until he was ready. He'd told her he would never say anything while I was with Remy, or in the aftermath of Remy, or at any point where his confession could feel like pressure or influence. He had decided on his own that if it was ever going to mean something real, I had to choose myself first. He would wait, and if I never came around to him, he would stay my friend and figure out how to live with that. I sat with that for a long time. My whole life, I had been loved by people who made their love my burden. My father loved me through expectation. Remy loved me through need. And here was a man who had loved me quietly enough that I never once had to carry the weight of it. He had protected me from his own feelings. I didn't know people did that. I didn't know that was even possible. I went to find him at the hospital. End of a long shift. He was in the stairwell, our stairwell, sitting on the same step where he'd first sat beside me in the dark. I sat down next to him, and I told him that he had sat with me when I had nothing to give, and that I'd like to try giving him something now, if he'd let me. He looked at me for a moment, then quietly, "I've been letting you." I thought Nolan was just a friend. I thought what we had was simple, ordinary, uncomplicated. But what it actually was the foundation, the kind that gets laid quietly, over time, without ceremony. And sometimes the most important love story of your life doesn't begin with fireworks. Sometimes it begins with someone sitting down beside you on a cold, concrete step and choosing to stay. If this story landed somewhere in you, if you've had someone like Nolan in your life, or if you're still waiting to recognize them, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment. Tell me your version. And if you want to keep getting stories that feel like this, honest, real, and worth every minute, like this video and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.